is the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast.
When you look at teams that can really contend in that AFC West with the Kansas City Chiefs, the first team that comes to mind is the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, last season, they finished with a 10-7 record. They scored 391 points. They gave up 384, so they had a +7 differential as far as that's concerned. Their passing offense ranked third in the league, averaging 282.4 yards per game, while their run offense was kind of at the bottom there, ranking 30th at 88.4. As far as their run defense is concerned, their run defense was 27th in the league, giving up 144.2 yards per game, while their pass defense was 7th in the league, giving up just 204.4 yards per contest. When looking at the 2022 season, kind of keeping an eye on 2023, what happened to the Chargers? Injuries really limited what the Chargers were and were not able to do last season. Justin Herbert never seemed to be able to get right after breaking his ribs there early on in the season, while his top two targets in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams missed a combined 11 contests. Likely due to injuries, but the Chargers offense was not efficient. 14th in yards per attempt, 6.1. But those injuries weren't the problem for the defense that allowed 5.2 yards per carry, which was a league worst. Now, saying that, those injuries had very little to do with what happened in that AFC wildcard game, in which the Chargers blew a 27-7 halftime lead to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, when you look at the 2023 season here and what's going on in camp, what camp battle am I interested in watching? Well, I want to see where this chemistry is coming from in this passing offense. I want to see what kind of chemistry Justin Herbert can develop with rookie wide receiver Quentin Johnson. I have strong feelings about Keenan Allen being a number one receiver, but I don't feel the same about Mike Williams being a number two. Williams will certainly be looked upon when the Chargers are down in the red zone, as he's one of the best contested catch guys in the league. Those contested catches are something that Quentin Johnson is going to have to improve on. Despite having his size, that is something that he really struggles with. That said, Johnson is a much better yards after the catch guy than Williams ever has been, and that is something that could earn him favor with Justin Herbert sooner rather than later. It's also one of the main reasons the Chargers selected Johnson in that first round, because they're looking for that explosive playmaker to lead them on to the next few seasons, because Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, they are getting a little bit older. Now, when you look at the rest of this draft class for the Chargers, we talked about Quentin Johnson being selected 21st overall. In the second round, they addressed the edge position. In the third round, they went to the linebacker there with Dayan Henley. Fourth round, went back to TCU, went back to the wide receiver position with Darius Davis. Fifth round, pick 156, offensive tackle Jordan McFadden. And in the seventh round, not a big deal, but they went with quarterback Max Duggan, again, out of TCU. So very strong TCU-type draft there with Johnson, Davis, and Duggan. Now, when you look at their additions via free agency, look, the Chargers really didn't do nothing as far as free agency is concerned. Their big pickup, their only pickup, really was linebacker Eric Kendricks, who was let go there from the Minnesota Vikings. Now, some of the losses, again, not a whole lot of loss here on the Chargers end of things. Linebackers Drew Tranquill, who went to the Kansas City Chiefs, linebacker Kyle Van Noy, and safety Nazir Adderley, who retired. So when we look at the best moves and the worst moves for this Chargers team here, Eric Kendricks, he's got to be considered the best move, because really he was the only move. I mean, you could talk about the draft picks there and Quentin Johnson being that guy, but Eric Kendricks has posted 90 tackles in each of his 8 seasons in the NFL and more than 105 total tackles there in 7 consecutive seasons. Kendricks' presence should improve on this Chargers run defense. We talked about how bad they were last season, and he's clearly an upgrade over Tranquill and Van Noy as a run defender. Even the Minnesota Vikings believe that he had lost a step and weren't really willing to pay a 31-year-old linebacker that $10 million cap hit. But the Chargers, hey, desperate times call for desperate measures, especially when your run defense is very desperate. Now, the worst move, it's not exactly what they did, but perhaps what they did not do. Sure, they added Kendricks there to stop the run there in the middle of that defense, but I'm not sure Morgan Fox, Austin Johnson, or Sebastian Joseph Day, as good of players as they are considered imposing frontline defenders along this defensive front. I'm not even sure they're really offensive coordinators game plan around these 3 guys. Los Angeles really could have benefited from the addition of a Javon Hargrave type player, or even a Delvin Tomlinson type player. Anything would have been an upgrade along that defensive front. But what needs to happen for the Chargers to have success here in 2023? Well, first, the Chargers have to put that wild card game behind them. I mean, when you collapse like that, it's always going to be in the back of your head, no matter what. No matter if you get up by 20 points, that whole loss in the wild card is going to be in the back of your head. It just is. They need to find a way to get past that heading into 2023. That's just the first step. Second, they need to stay healthy. We talked about the injuries to Herbert, to Jalen Guyton, to Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. This offense was decimated by injuries, but their defense suffered too. Joey Bosa also missed significant time, and he's a big part of that Chargers defense. We know what this Chargers offense is capable of doing when it has all its pieces in place. Herbert, Allen, Williams, Eckler, Gerald Everett, they all return. Add Quentin Johnson to this mix here, and another big-time playmaker to this offense, and you have one of the most prolific group of playmakers any team can field at any time. Now, as long as they can all remain on the field, the Chargers are going to be one of the few teams that can go punch for punch with this Kansas City Chiefs team. After all, they lost their 2 games against their division rivals by a combined 6 points last season. As far as their record goes in 2023, they're going to be battling the likes of Miami, Cleveland, and the New York Jets for that final playoff berth in the postseason. And it all comes down to that run defense, that Chargers Achilles heel. So I'm going to say the Chargers right now finish with a 10-7 record and are going to be knocking on that wild card opportunity when it comes to postseason play. Now, we want to talk about play. Let's talk about fantasy play. Let's talk about fantasy assets, and let's talk about the top 5 for the Los Angeles Chargers, starting with Justin Herbert. In 2022, Herbert not only dealt with injuries to his top receivers, but he also battled through that rib injury himself, and he was never quite right all season long. Now, yet when you look at it all, only Patrick Mahomes had more passing yards than Herbert's 4,739. The addition of Quentin Johnson, along with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, should help push those 2022 yards per attempt much higher than the 6.8 he had last season. Austin Eckler, he comes in at number 2. Eckler wanted a new deal. Instead, his current deal got reworked to include more incentives. In the last 2 seasons, Eckler leads all running backs in receptions with 177, receiving yards with 1,369, and touchdowns with 38. His 3,195 scrimmage yards, that sits third. Number 3, Keenan Allen. He is that wide receiver 1 that you're paying wide receiver 2 prices on each and every season. Why do we not just figure this out? Now, injuries I know play a factor into it, and last season it was no different. That we kind of went back to where Keenan Allen was quote-unquote injury prone. I don't believe that's the case. I think it was just bad luck here for Keenan Allen last season. Now, over the Chargers' final 6 contests, Allen's fantasy production was inside the top 12 in 4 of those games. Now, Mike Williams, he comes in at number 4 despite missing 4 games last season, probably playing hurt in many other contests in 2022. When looking at a points per game basis, Williams was wide receiver 20, and his 895 receiving yards, that was 25th in the league. He also counted for 31.1% of the Chargers' air yards, which was 21st in the NFL. And finally, you can't go on and talk about fantasy assets without talking about the rookie here, Quentin Johnson. He could take a 5-yard curl, make a dude miss, and make a house call from anywhere on the field. He's a playmaker. Just ask DJ Turner. So who's that one player that you have to add from the Los Angeles Chargers? It's Austin Eckler, who has been incentivized here heading into 2023. The Chargers refused to extend him, but they did add some money via incentives. So Eckler will not only be looking to earn those bonuses, but also build a resume there for a potential payday next season. Although he will be 29 once the 2024 season comes around. In PPR formats, Eckler is one of those no-doubter type picks, finishing first or second in PPR scoring in each of the last 2 seasons. Last year was a bit of a down year for him. He only scored 18 times after scoring 20 times the season prior. Behind Eckler, it's Joshua Kelly, it's Isaiah Spiller, it's Larry Roundtree. There's no one here to challenge Eckler for a role here on this Chargers backfield. As far as the biggest bust, Mike Williams drives me crazy. He may not be a bust in traditional senses here, but there will be weeks in which he completely disappears. I mean, right now, Allen's ADP is 41.5, while Williams is just a few spots behind him at 44.6. There will be weeks that Mike Williams certainly outproduces Keenan Allen, but there's going to be just as many weeks in which he fails to record double-digit fantasy points. I need that consistency, man. I need the consistency. Now, the best value for fantasy on this Chargers team, if I feel a certain way about Mike Williams, that means I feel that Keenan Allen is an absolute steal. Keenan Allen is basically the last receiver that I feel comfortable with in fantasy to be my wide receiver 1, especially if I hit running backs early on. Allen, he has to stay healthy too. When he was healthy, he was one of the top receivers in fantasy. No, really. Look at weeks 11 through 18. Wide receiver 4, thanks to a 26.5% target share, a 34.9% air yard share, while averaging 2.24 yards per route. When you think about fantasy sleepers, most players that are being slept on didn't even play last season, as is the case for Jalen Guyton. That's how deep we're going for this Chargers team. Last season, we know none of these Chargers could stay healthy, and that includes Jalen Guyton there, who also suffered that ACL injury back in September. But, he's got that full year kind of to recover there. And there's no speedster on this Chargers team. There's no one to stretch this defense for Justin Herbert. That's exactly what Jalen Guyton comes in and does. He's that guy who's going to stretch out defenses and create not only for himself, but for his teammates out there and for Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert needs Jalen Guyton just as much as he needs Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Austin Eckler. It's just that we don't talk about Jalen Guyton and what he does. It's not always going to show up on the stat sheet, but at some point it's going to be. If you're looking at best ball or something like that, Jalen Guyton is one of those guys you have to make sure you're drafting. And you could do no worse considering we know the injury history of this Chargers team. We know that Mike Williams has struggled to stay healthy. We know that Keenan Allen has struggled to stay healthy. If that's the case, then Jalen Guyton, Joshua Palmer, and Quentin Johnson could be the players that lead this team moving forward.